Okay, so we have a list of our property, we've got a list of our budget. Somewhere along the line, you're going to need to decide if you're going to hire a lawyer. And there's a whole session about what to do and how to figure out if you need a lawyer or not. But some people really can't afford a lawyer, and in that case, there's usually some help on websites, on most court websites, for people that are representing themselves, and that's called pro se, and it's P-R-O, another word, S-E. So there's a lot of help for people that can't afford to get a lawyer, and I'm not giving you legal advice because I can't, because I don't really know anything about your situation as much as I'd like to. So I can't give you any legal advice, but if you can't afford a lawyer, then you need to find out as much information as you can by going online and using official court or state websites. Don't necessarily rely on a lawyer's website to tell you what to do, because you need to get as much first-hand information as you can. Well, let's assume for a moment that you can afford to hire a lawyer. What I want to tell you is that lawyers are really expensive. The least you want to do is try to minimize your expense as much as possible. So if you take the planner that we've provided and you organize your finances, and you have copies of your bank records and copies of your mortgage statements and copies of your 401k and your IRA and your pay stubs and your tax returns and all the things that you're going to see in there, if you can show up at the lawyer's office with all that stuff organized, first of all, you're going to a really happy lawyer and a really happy paralegal, but second of all, and more importantly, you're going to save a lot of money. So even though it's scary, and even though you're incredibly emotional, if you can gather your wits about you and get some friends to help you gather all this financial information and get that stuff to your lawyer, you're going to be much better off and able to approach this from a little bit more of a position of power and control over your own situation, which is usually a good thing. So if your husband filed paperwork against you that's demanding that you come into court relatively soon to make decisions about child custody and budgets and spousal maintenance or alimony or whatever you have in your state, and who's going to live in the house, you need to act really quickly. You need to get that stuff pulled together, and like I said, read that paperwork incredibly carefully and pull together what you need to get to your lawyer. So another thing you also might want to think about in terms of property, if you have a collection that's valuable, you want to be sure to put that on your list of assets. And then there's also another category of property, which is sort of heirlooms or memorabilia, things that are really important to you. And I always recommend that people take those things out of the house if they can. And I don't know if your state says you can't do that, then you can't do that. But if it's like your grandmother's silverware, but it's not really a highly valuable thing, like pictures from your mother or a family picture from your parents' wedding, or things that are really meaningful to you and they can't be replaced, those are sometimes things that you want to get out of the house if you can do that sort of subtly. But if he's already moved out, it doesn't really matter. But you just don't want those things to be used as bargaining chips later on in your divorce. So if you've got that kind of stuff around, I usually say put that at your girlfriend's house or something, just so you can't disappear any of your assets and hide anything, but you can say, I'm going to move this over here so that it doesn't become a bargaining chip later on in the divorce. So that's special personal property, and then we've talked about valuable personal property. So that sort of takes care of what you need to do initially in the financial aspect of this, and now you've got to figure out what to do for your kids, which is obviously, it's important that what you do for your kids, but your kids are not going to be safe and secure if you're financially in a disaster. So do your finance, kind of like that thing on the airplane that says put the oxygen on your kid first, and then or on yourself first and then on your kids. The same thing, make sure you're financially secure and then turn to the children's situation as long as they're safe in the meantime, because if you're not able to take care of yourself, then you're all kind of in trouble. So now let's talk about the kids. It would be important in your state, or whatever state you live in, for you to find out what are the factors that are used to determine where the kids stay during this temporary time period between when the divorce has been filed and when the divorce is finalized. And some states call that the temporary period or the pending period. There's all kinds of different names. But some states, most states operate under this thing called the best interest of the children. And that means that they want the children to be in some stable arrangement that's not very foreign to them. So in some states, they just sort of assume that both parents are equally responsible, and they come up with sort of a 50-50 plan during that time period. And in other states, they want way more specifics, and they want to keep minimal disruption to the children. They don't want the kids to be thrown into a really new situation, because the courts and the research shows that, kids need sort of a runway from going from being in a two-parent family to what's going to happen at the end of the divorce. So in some states, they're going to look at factors like who's done what for the children for what part of their life, like who gets them up and makes them breakfast and takes them to school and picks them up from daycare and does the homework and takes them to the doctor and makes the play dates. And they really actually, in some states, they look very carefully at those factors in order to determine where the kids should spend most of their time. And that can be really scary because, if you're a working mom, it may well be that your kid's dad has been really involved in raising your children, and you're faced with the idea of, having to share custody of your children with this guy who just filed for divorce against you. So it's helpful to look at the statute in your state, or to certainly talk to a lawyer and ask, what are the factors in my state that are going to determine where the kids are going to be? Because if somebody filed divorce against you, you didn't have any time to plan, anything about your children's custody situation beforehand. So it can be really scary when you realize that a court's going to, just come in and say the kids are going to spend half of the time with the dad, or even more time than half of the time with the dad. If maybe say you've got your kid's father is not employed and you are, it's possible that the court's going to say he's going to be the, the main primary custodial parent until we figure out what's best for the kids. And so if that happens in your situation, you just better start understanding what the law is in your state and kind of start being prepared for that. Then you want to take a look at your kid's schedule, and you want to look at the schedule and see what would be a good custody plan. And somehow, this is hard, somehow if you can start to look at this whole situation from the perspective of your children, you're going to make it much better through this process. Because if one of your values in heading through your divorce is that you want your kids to come out, strong and supported and loved, then it's pretty important that you find a way not to impose on your children the amount of anger or fear or hostility that you feel towards their father. So that's really, really hard. And it's kind of at this point that you want to start thinking about what I kind of call as a vision for your divorce. And we have a whole session on that, and it really talks about what kind of person you want to be during this process and what are your high values. And if you can put your children, their needs ahead of your needs, which is really hard, and approach this from the perspective of what's really best for your kids. And it's hard to say that it might be better for my kids to spend a lot of time or equal time or a whole bunch of time with their dad. But there's a lot of research out there that shows that kids need two parents. And it can be really hard to sort of have to face that fact. There's a ton of really good books out there, and we've got a good book list on our website that I would really recommend that at the minimum you read some really good books about co-parenting kids and about what kids need when they're in a divorce, because you don't want a kid to think that they're responsible somehow for your well-being. And I don't pretend to be a psychologist, but I've certainly seen enough of this happen to know that that's the kind of thing in the divorce process that is really hard on kids. So in divorce and child custody, you have to think about what's going to be best for your children. Don't talk to your kids about what's going on in your divorce. That's like the biggest number one no-no, is to start saying daddy's left us and he doesn't love us anymore, something like that. Let's stop for a minute and let you think about your kids' schedule. Be really realistic about your schedule. I mean, if you have to be to work at 7 o'clock in the morning, how realistic is it for you to have the kids every single morning, or for them to stay at your house every day, or who gets off when? So if you pretend like it's not your family and pretend like you're looking at it from a third person's perspective, and think about if you're from the perspective of your children, what do you think would be best? That doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be. And if you have a lawyer, or even if you don't, that is not necessarily going to offer to your ex as far as a parenting custodial arrangement. But spend some time now and just sort of outline what you think would be a good schedule, like where the kids should be on various days given their activities and your work schedule and their father's work schedule. Well, as part of the divorce process and part of the child custody process, sometimes the court will appoint, or the parties will actually agree to appoint a third party to take a look and try to figure out what's best temporarily and what's best sort of in the long term for your kids. I'm not going to go into it at length, but I do want to say that there might be somebody appointed, like a case manager or a mental health worker or a parenting evaluator or a guardian ad litem, which we call a GAL. Different states have different kinds of people that they appoint, but at the end of the day, in a lot of divorces, there gets to be appointed some sort of an expert of some sort who's going to come and report back into the family court what they think is best for your kids. So you want to start getting prepared for that possibility. And one thing you want to think about is there's going to have this person, either this person or your ex or the court is going to be looking at you sort of from a perspective that you're not used to being looked at. You're not used to people sort of evaluating you. And that's pretty threatening for most people to think, well, what are they going to look at? Well, here's one thing they're going to look at. They're going to look at your Facebook page, or they're going to look at whatever you've got online about yourself. So as soon as this thing gets filed, or as soon as you're in the process or even think that you might be heading for a divorce, you want to be really careful about what you put on the internet about yourself. And you want to be careful about if you have a blog or an online diary. People are going to be looking at you from a different perspective. So think about, if you weren't you and you were looking at you, what would you look for? You'd look Facebook, you'd look for online blogs. If you think you're going to be accused of drinking too much or, smoking dope or something like that, you want to start thinking about courts pretty frequently. If there's an allegation that somebody's using illegal drugs or drinking too much, courts can say, today, right now, head down to the drug testing place and I want a drug test on you. So if that's your situation, and I'm not trying to be judgmental or anything, I'm just letting you know, it's possible that a court's going to send you off to have a drug test if you think that's something that your ex is going to say. It works the same way for him too. If you think he's been, doing illegal drugs or drinking too much, you want to act promptly to have him drug tested. You could talk to your lawyer, but we're just talking about issue spotting right now. And one issue is if there's illegal substance abuse, whether it's you or him or both of you, you just want to start thinking about how you're going to prepare for a possible drug testing thing. So you want to be super honest with your lawyer, and so that the lawyer can give you the very best advice about that type of situation if you're in that situation. And then lastly, I'm going to just talk a little bit about if you have a very controlling husband and either a domestic violence situation, which could be anything from being hit to being highly controlled. If you have a husband who's you don't know what's going on with your finances, or if he's somebody who doesn't even bring your financial documents in the house, or you're forbidden to open bank account statements, or he tries to he's too controlling of you, like, wants to know where you are all the time, or you have to check in with him on a regular basis, or he doesn't like you hanging out with your friends. If you're in a situation like that, let your lawyer know, because they can help you come up with a game plan for how you're going to approach this situation. And let the people on your team kind of know that too, because it can be really difficult to disentangle yourself from someone who's that controlling. And so you just want to start thinking about things like that. And if you feel like you've been in a controlling situation, you might want to start reading some books about domestic violence, because domestic violence doesn't have to just be getting hit. It can also be financial control or physical control or some other type of control where you're not really able to be your own person. So you want to think a little bit about that when if you're in a situation where you've just been served with divorce papers. We've covered kind of the divorce process. We've covered the fact that the court might be able to make decisions for you. We've covered making a list of your assets and your debts and trying to figure out what your budget is. We've talked about coming up with a good plan for your children. We've talked about what you might be looking at if the court appoints some type of an expert to evaluate you, and different types of things that you just want to sort of clean up about yourself so that you can really dig into the nitty-gritty and figure out exactly what information you need to take to your lawyer so that you can get this thing going and take good financial care of yourself.